This scene from episode 4 of The Chosen was not what you think, and let me explain. Now, if you guessed that this was the daughter of Herodias preparing to dance before Herod, you'd be correct. And if you guessed that this foreshadows the death of John the Baptist, you'd also be correct. But if you thought that this dance is going to be the reason that John the Baptist dies, well, then there's something really important in the Bible that you need to see. So let's look at it together in this episode of The Chosen Explained. Now, before we start, if you're interested in learning insights that will help you to understand the Bible more clearly and see it with an entirely new set of eyes, then make sure to click the link above and down in the description where you can download a free book I wrote called 10 Words That Will Change the Way You Read the Bible. It's a quick but powerful read that will teach you a whole lot in just a short period of time, just like this video. Speaking of, let's dive in. In a recent live stream, The Chosen showed us a clip from episode 1 of season 4, where we see Herodias' daughter preparing a dance for King Herod. Mark's gospel puts it this way: Herodias nursed a grudge against John and wanted to kill him. Finally, the opportune time came. On his birthday, Herod gave a banquet for his high officials and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. When the daughter of Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his dinner guests. But in order to understand how this leads to John's death and what's really happening in this scene and in Scripture, we have to first understand some more about who Herod really was and why this situation arises in the first place. Now, when Mark's Gospel mentions Herod, it refers to him as King Herod. And this is something that can actually create a lot of confusion. You see, there are several Herods in Scripture: Herod the Great, Herod Agrippa, Herod Archelaus, and in this passage, Mark's referring to a man named Herod Antipas. Now, what's interesting about Herod Antipas is that his power didn't extend very broadly. He wasn't the king of all of Israel. He wasn't even the king of Jerusalem. In fact, he wasn't even really a true king at all. He might have called himself king and required others to call him king, but the more accurate description of this Herod is a title we find in Matthew and Luke's gospel: Tetrarch. This is because when his father, Herod the Great, died, the same Herod who ordered all young males to be killed when Jesus was born, when he died, his lands were redistributed by Rome. In some of the land, they installed their own Roman governors, and in other parts, they gave them to Herod's sons. Antipas was in charge of the regions of Galilee and Perea. And since Galilee is where most of Jesus' ministry occurs, this is why we see Herod Antipas appear so prominently in the Gospels. This fact also gives us context for the conflict between Herod and John. John performed his ministry along the Jordan. He too crossed into Herod's territory. And this ultimately leads us back to the scene from the episode. Herodias is upset because John has spoken out against her marriage to Herod. But the real question is, why does their marriage upset him so much? And the answer to that is actually fairly complex. You see, when Herod decides to marry Herodias, he's actually already married. And so is Herodias. Herodias is actually the wife of Herod's brother Philip, who is also a tetrarch. So for Herod to marry Herodias, not only must he divorce his wife, and not only must Herodias leave her husband, causing both of them to commit adultery. Additionally, Herodias is his niece, the daughter of his brother Aristobulus. And finally, as if all of that wasn't scandal enough, this marriage will ultimately lead to an armed conflict between Herod's armies and the armies of his former wife's father Aretas, costing innocent people their lives. This is a moral disaster on many levels. It will harm people far beyond those involved. It highlights the immorality of those in power, those leading the nation. And ultimately, it's something John will forfeit his life to resist. But here's the thing. That's only part of the story, right? That's the story on the surface. But then there's also a deeper meaning here, the subtle narrative that also impacts Jesus. Because if you go back to Scripture, one of the things that you will notice is that John's death is mentioned totally out of the blue, right? It feels like such a random insertion until you start looking closely at what's going on around it. Because if we go back to Scripture, just before Mark tells us the story of John and Herod, he tells us of the rumors spreading about Jesus. And as with any person who's suddenly thrust into celebrity, people quickly begin to ask questions about Jesus, saying, who is this man really? And several ideas are floated about Jesus. Some say Elijah, others say that one of the prophets has come back, others say that John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. But this isn't a rumor that goes away. In fact, 2 chapters later, these speculations about Jesus are still pervasive. Jesus asks his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they tell him, "John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others one of the prophets." But there's more to this rumor about Jesus than simply thinking a prophet has returned. This is meant to show us how Jesus was viewed by the people around him. And more importantly, this is meant to indicate how Jesus was viewed by Herod and others in positions of power. Because when was the last time we saw Herod's name appear in Mark's gospel? It was when Mark told us this. He said, "Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus." The truth is, Jesus and John aren't just interesting evangelists and curious prophets in Herod's eyes. They're threats. Mark is subtly showing us a much more sinister story beneath the surface of the events unfolding before us, which helps us to see the real story behind this dance. That in the end, this isn't just about a dance. It isn't just about a marriage. It's about the fact that John and Jesus are threats to those in power. And just like they will find an excuse to kill Jesus through false charges and secret trials, they'll use whatever means necessary to get rid of John as well. Well, that's it for this episode of The Chosen Explained. Now, before you go, make sure to click the link above and down in the description where you can download my free book called 10 Words That Will Change the Way You Read the Bible. And if you enjoyed this video and would like to see more videos like this that will help you to see the Chosen and the Bible in an entirely new way, then just click this link right here. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.